Welcome all. Hi, my name is Alan Gregg, and this is Earnscliffe's webinar, One for the Ages. I want to welcome also my guests, fellow colleagues, panelists, Bruce Young out on the West Coast, Melanie Richer, who is also on the West Coast today, Dale Richardson from Canada's Prairies, and Ellie Alboim from our Ottawa office, as well as Stephanie Constable. Within our organization, we like to talk about anticipatory intelligence. That is, rather than kind of relitigating what's gone on in the past or what happened today, what might we anticipate as a consequence of what we do know today? So, as a consequence, we want to talk about Canada US relations, Canada on the global stage, priorities for infrastructure spending, budget focus, all the kinds of things that you might want to get some insights on going forward. But given the uncertainty of where we are right now, we'll get to those things. But they're all going to have to be viewed a little bit through the challenge of maneuvering a parliament and agenda through the lens of politics. There's still some dozen ridings that the results are too close to call. There's some 1 million special ballots that Election Canada is going through right now and counting, and so we aren't absolutely certain. It looks like there's a minority government, but that isn't an absolute certainty. So before we get on to other things, I want to call upon my colleague Stephanie Constable to kind of review where we are right now. Stephanie?
Thank you, Alan. Just getting myself set up here. Okay. Yeah, so thank you. In terms of the context, in trying to sort of highlight some slides and some information that likely is information you have probably seen if you spent the wee hours following the vote tracking last evening and into the morning today. But I thought it might help just sort of set context to have a little bit of information going in. For those of you who joined our webinar a couple of weeks ago, Midpoint Mayhem, you may remember this graph. It's basically a snapshot of the combined results of different publicly released polling data of several companies over the last 6 months. The various dots that you see depict vote intention for each party across the different polls, with the thicker swoosh sort of illustrating the aggregate for each party. We put some vertical line markers from left to right of the map just to outline key developments over the 6-month time. Things like Trump's presidency, turmoil in the Liberal Party, the former Prime Minister's resignation in January, Mark Carney as the new Liberal leader and Prime Minister designate in March. And we added a new line for the leaders debate last week, week before last. And visually, I thought it's a very great snapshot that captures sort of the story of this election, and what started as a near certain Conservative victory quickly evolved into a two-party race in response to unexpected interventions, particularly from US President Donald Trump, which reshaped voter sentiment and helped swing the outcome. But what we've sort of been seeing over the last week or so since our last webinar was a tightening.
Stephanie, there's a pop-up button just to, yeah,
thank
you.
you.
Great.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. So what we've seen in the last week or so is a tightening in the final days of the campaign that sort of reflected two forces in opposing directions. So on one side, the Conservatives were holding steady with their core base, particularly in Western Canada and among younger male voters, and with renewed momentum around domestic issues and a message focused on change. They began closing the gap, and I think with more time, it's possible the outcome could have looked a little different. On the other side, I talked a little bit about the external events and that heightened tension with the United States, and that was driving a late surge in Liberal support, particularly in urban and suburban ridings. Continued interventions from President Trump, including on election day itself, may have pushed some late deciding voters towards a message of stability and sovereignty. But in the end, the polls captured a race that had truly sort of compressed. The Liberal surge was real, maybe not deeply anchored, and while the Conservative base didn't collapse, they couldn't really expand in the places that they needed to, or at least that's what sort of the preliminary findings are suggesting. I want to take a look at the last published polls aggregated by 338 Canada as of late Sunday evening, so on the left, before Election Day polling ban, publication ban. And so what you see in this slide is that all of these companies were initially predicting sort of the Liberal resurgence. Polls were accurately captured the Liberal Party's rebound under Mark Carney's leadership. And after trailing earlier in the year, the Liberals gained momentum in the final weeks, with polls showing a lead of 3 to 4 percentage point over the Conservatives. And as of just sort of earlier this morning, when I kind of updated this based on where we're at, the shift was reflected in the election outcome. And what we're seeing so far is that the Liberals have secured at least a fourth consecutive term. Not sure yet whether that is a minority or a majority term. The other thing the polls got right, and it speaks to the last slide that I showed, is that polling effectively highlighted the issues that resonated with voters, such as cost of living, affordability, and concerns over U.S. relations. These topics were central to the campaign narratives and influenced voters' decisions. The third thing that I think that the polls got right were regional dynamics. So this is basically showing the sort of where we're at right now with the regional vote share patterns, and they accurately sort of capture party support and what the polls were predicting initially. They showed the Conservatives maintaining strong backing in the Prairie provinces, with the Liberals strong in Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. And then if we look, this is CBC's vote tracker with the seat projections. The story looks quite different. And while the votes are still being tallied, a couple of things to note here is that while the Conservatives were strong in the Prairies overall, in Manitoba, particularly in Winnipeg, the Liberals made surprising gains. And while the Liberals led in vote share in key regions like Atlantic Canada, Ontario, and Quebec, the Conservatives made some interesting gains in Newfoundland and Ontario. So overall, what we're seeing right now, and again, as Alan mentioned, things are still being tallied up. The Liberals seem to be up 8 seats, the Conservatives up 25 seats, and this comes at the expense of the NDP down 18, the Bloc down 9, and the Green down 1 seat. There was one other thing I thought that has been sort of a really important and maybe symbolic event or polling sort of turnout change in this election, and that relates to the overall voter turnout and the advanced voter turnout. And so this chart shows 2 lines, the blue line tracking overall voter turnout and the orange dotted line tracking advanced voter turnout across the past dozen elections, so going back to 1993. And what we see is that overall turnout has fluctuated over the past 30 years, ranging from a low of 59% in 2008 to a high this election estimated at around 75%. And advanced voting tells a different story. It's sort of seen a consistent and dramatic rise from 4% of registered voters in 1993 to an estimated 35% or 7.3 million Canadians over the Easter weekend this year. And I think this signals that the stakes in this election were exceptionally high. Turnout at this level shows Canadians believed the issues at hand, cost of living, affordability, the economy, national sovereignty, were serious enough to demand action. High turnout reflects a public that feels genuinely at risk or inspired, not apathetic. Advanced voting also played a critical strategic role. Parties that were better organized to mobilize at early votes appeared to have gained a real advantage. And because so many ballots were already cast, the late shifts in narrative, particularly Conservatives' compelling change message, may have come a little too late to change sort of the outcome or where we're at right now. And then I would say the steady rise of advanced voting over time suggests it's not just about convenience, and it reflects a broader shift towards more continuous, less election day centric participation. And campaigns now have to sort of run full early vote operations and not just sprint to the finish line. So, just a few things I thought might be interesting to sort of tease out the conversation, but didn't want to sort of go over everything that I'm sure everyone has already looked at or watched themselves last night very closely.
Well, Stephanie, I mean, we've titled this webinar "One for the Ages." I mean, is that hyperbole on our part, or was this actually one of the most unusual and consequential elections in modern history? Have we seen one like this before?
I mean, that title might sound a little dramatic, but I definitely think it fits. I think this election will likely be seen as one of the most unusual and consequential in modern Canadian history. The country entered the campaign already facing significant domestic challenges. External pressures with the increased tensions with the United States introduced new concerns about sovereignty and our democracy, and those tensions elevated the stakes far beyond a typical policy-driven campaign. Not to mention, we also saw like a rare set of political circumstances, change in leadership, as I mentioned, an interim prime minister, a new party leader just a few weeks ago, shifting dynamics in major regions. As I mentioned, the voter turnout numbers, and then 4 of 7 party leaders defeated. So personally, I think it stands out not just for its political drama, but also for the broader implications for the future of our country.
Yeah, I've never seen an ascent that was sustained like that. I mean, in 1984, we saw when John Turner came in, they got a big bump in the polls on the heels of an unpopular leader, and then Kim Campbell in 1993. But never anything that saw, and as you know, also to have that kind of external exogenous issue dominate the focus of a lot of voters. You showed us what the 9 pollsters were showing on the weekend, and there's popular vote looks like very close, but all 9 of them were predicting a majority government. Did they get something wrong here?
uh, Pollsters wrong. Those are like terms that I don't like to put together.
Oh, we know.
No, yeah, I think that they overestimated the Liberals. I think mainly in Ontario, I think the Liberals did not do as well in the GTA 905 as compared to predictions. We know that is sort of a mainly middle class commuter family communities or ridings with different ethnic backgrounds, and there's a high sensitivity to affordability issues like housing costs, taxes, and I think conservatives were really hammering home that life is an affordable message, and I think it sort of resonated. I think they also underestimated the resilience of the conservative base. So polls capture the broad trends, but they don't always reflect a party's ability to mobilize support where it matters most. And I think the conservatives maintained strong regional footholds and turned out their voters effectively, particularly in battleground areas, including several NDP expected ridings in Ontario that didn't turn Liberal but actually turned Conservative. And I think the last thing is strategic voting. I think it likely boosted the Liberal vote share without expanding their seat count. I think some voters aimed to try to block a Conservative victory and then shifted sort of towards the Liberals instead of supporting smaller left-leaning parties, and that voting was concentrated in ridings where Liberals were already poised to win. So basically just in effect padded the margins and didn't really flip any new seats.
You showed that there were 2 very different sets of concerns that were driving 2 very different voting choices in this, which is also unusual circumstance. But the polls also showed some major differences across demographic lines, especially gender, which we're kind of used to, but also age. I mean, you showed that increase in advanced polling, and that all of the polling of the advanced polling had the Liberals up some 13 points, which I think has also added a little bit to the confusion in terms of where the actual results were going to come in, as the advance polls in some instances were counted early, in some instances were counted late, but disproportionately old people voting in the advance polls, disproportionately voting Liberal.
Yeah, yeah.
Make anything of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of their I think that it's a stage of life and priorities thing, right? I think that they prioritize economic stability, lower taxes, personal financial security, and then that context around national sovereignty, I think, really hit home for them. I think they benefit from the current system and largely sought to preserve that rather than overhaul it. And we did also see sort of the younger 18 to 34-year-old demographic
Yeah.
where the focus is around cost of living and housing and those more domestic issues that I talked about, those were the ones who really were showing up to support the Conservatives, and where that those issues were really more prominent for them. And then there are also, as you said, sort of gender differences with men, particularly older men, placing emphasis on the economic growth, reducing the tax burden, but then also valuing that national security and sovereignty. And sort of, I think with women, the challenge was that they're concerned with healthcare, education, the social programs, and also resisting some of the conservative rhetoric around like the divisive, and threatening things around rights, so reproductive rights and protections for minority groups. So you're right, demos did definitely play a big part in this election as well.
Thanks for setting the table there, Stephanie. That's really helpful. Bruce and I were speculating that the boomers voting liberal, we didn't know whether it was concern about their riffs or in fact just they were reattaching to their old hippie roots. But clearly it was a factor in the election. So thanks again, Ellie. I want to start with you. I mean, notwithstanding this uncertainty that we set off at the top, I mean, Mark Carney's going to be sworn in as the prime minister in a matter of days. I mean, what are his three top priorities going to be, and how different are those priorities under a minority compared to what possibly could be a majority rule?
Um, well, I guess it depends on the timetable you apply to it. I think there's some routine and mundane stuff that has to be his first priority. So obviously the first step is going to be forming a government. And he will have to change the face of the government out of the starting blocks. He needs to reposition his government as a economic and fiscally driven government rather than the social policy driven government that was under Justin. And Bruce will talk about some of the people he's recruited, but he'll work very hard to put a new face on government, whether majority or minority, and who's picked for the ministries where is of an immediate concern. The other short-term issues dictated by the structures of Parliament and the rhythm of Parliament. They must reconvene the House in relatively short order because they need to get money. The special warrants will run out, and they will need to get supply passed in government, passed in the spring. And the deadline for that is traditionally the end of June. And then they have the things like the G7 coming up in early June. So a lot of what they're going to do, they will have to do regardless of whether it's majority or minority. And frankly, in my view, it doesn't matter if it's majority or minority. It's
Expand that, because that's an interesting point. I mean, you made the point we were discussing earlier that we're all fussed up. Is it majority, minority, and how does that change things? You're saying over the next 4 months, it really doesn't make that much difference one way or the other.
No, it doesn't.
Explain that.
Yeah, well, first of all, there's no party that's going to set off an election. So when the House reconvenes, any vote of confidence will pass. There has to be a vote of confidence around supply to fund the government. The government will have to make a choice. It obviously will need a speech from the throne, but it can be a minor one or a major one, depending on whether it's ready to set the agenda on a policy level. And the same is true of its budget. It's not clear whether it needs a budget or just the economics statement in order to get through the next little while. But in any case, there will be no opposition in the House of any significance until things start to reform in the fall and winter. None of the parties can risk setting off another election. It's an exercise in self-harm if they do. The G7, much more substantive. He will have to manage a very complex public policy environment, both internationally and domestically. And the role of Trump in G7 is the first flashpoint um, uh, structurally, though obviously he'll have to deal with Trump as we go. I don't think there's any advantage to trying to uh, bring that to a head in the short term. I think he needs to settle his government. He needs to settle his ministry. He needs to settle his team to get that resolved. There's also, remember, something we overlook, which is there's an entire government to staff. Most of the staffs have left ministry offices and departmental offices. They've got to find a whole new set of hundreds of staffers to set the tone. The Prime Minister's office is virtually vacant now. They've got to assess that. So he's got a lot of housekeeping and mundane things to do, which don't matter whether it's majority or minority, because nobody else gets to render an opinion on it. But of course, he's got to begin to set the process towards building Canadian resilience in the face of Trump. But that's a more medium-term issue, and maybe a budgetary issue than it is a short-term one till the end of June.
Let's get to that. But first, I want to ask Dale. I mean, Pierre Poilievre wins 25 seats and loses his own. Has he had enough of a gain that his leadership is stable, that the party and the caucus will support him, or has he got some trouble on his hands going forward here?
I don't think it's an easy path forward for him, Alan. Chiefly, I mean, maybe top one is that he doesn't have a seat currently.
Yeah.
It's hard to have command of your caucus in the House of Commons if you're not actually in the House of Commons. And those of us who have watched him for a couple of decades now know that Pierre Poilievre became as popular as he did in large part because of his time spent in question period and being an attack dog for Harper first, and then in the last number of years. So I think the big difference going forward, and why I think Mr. Poilievre might be able to hang on as leader of the party, is who is waiting in the wings. I think obviously people are talking about Doug Ford. He might be interested in that, or Tim Houston, somebody like that. But if you think back to 2021 when O'Toole lost that election, Pierre Poilievre and Jenny Byrne, they were waiting in the wings, ready to take him down, and we all know what happened there. His successor, at least within the current Conservative Party of Canada, is not 100% clear. And the second thing I'll say on that is Poilievre, he's a fighter, for better or for worse. I don't think it's in his nature to have a bad election result, or at least not the one that his party wanted to have, and to lose his seat and just say, well, okay, I mean, I guess that's it. So I will not be surprised, Alan, if he hangs on here and runs in another seat somewhere.
You touched on it, but very, very quickly in terms of waiting in the wings. I mean, we know we don't want to relitigate what's happened in the past, but it has an implication of what's going to happen in the future. I mean, what do you make of Corey Teneke and Doug Ford's intervention into this campaign? I mean, you just don't see that in partisan politics. And then we saw, in addition, late last night, Jamil Javani, the conservative member from Durham, just ripped Doug Ford a new one, and you could see that there's some really, really strong tension there. I mean, how's that going to play out?
One of the unfortunate things as a conservative are these types of things to me. I really don't like it. I come from the Bradwell Sask Party world of big tent politics, where we have a lot of different voices and a lot of different opinions, but at the same time, we are all moving forward together to win elections. I was more disturbed by Giovanni's comments last night than I was on Corey Tenike's and Doug Ford's comments during the election, mostly because many of us, at least on the outside looking in, could see that the campaign was not going as great as it maybe should have been. and I think especially concerns about Poilievre not talking enough about Donald Trump, or positioning his party with that issue. But the infighting, it happens after every election, it seems, and it's very, very bad for the Conservative Party. So I don't know now going forward if it's Doug Ford and his people and the people in the Conservative Party of Canada, but the people need to get together in a room somewhere and shake hands and decide we cannot be we can't be at odds with each other, because we need everybody to win elections going forward. And this approach recently hasn't been very good.
Melanie, you're on the West Coast. You were with Jagmeet Singh yesterday. I mean, we often treat politics as a blood sport, and we diminish the value of the people who enter it when we do this. Clearly, a good man. He's going to resign. Where does the NDP go from here? What kind of conversation is going to happen next within the party, and who might be putting their hand up and saying, "I'm the next person for that job"?
Right. That's a really good question. I think like Dale mentioned a little bit about the conversations that need to be have everybody in a room, figure out what direction the party's going in. I think the same thing needs to happen. And the big part, and what's funny about this part is with the supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, the goal of that from a strategy or political side was to show the party could be more credible, to show that the leader could be more credible in the eyes of the voter. And this election, really, for us, what it came down to was who is most credible to take on Trump. And there was kind of a lack of credibility there. So I think as part of those conversations and reflections that members need to have, part of that needs to be how do we make the next leader more credible in the eyes of voters to lead the country and to tackle the big issues that people are faced with. And also, how can the party be credible? Because right now, of course, we had the two issues. The leader wasn't necessarily credible and the party wasn't either. So I think those conversations will be really important. As a member, I'm hopeful that as part of those conversations, folks take a look at the really good things that Jagmeet has done and the ways that he's talked about how we face the issues that people are up against, and build on that instead of say, you know what, we're throwing this out, we're going to take a hard turn to the left and we're going to do these things differently. I think for New Democrats to be successful, they need to um, they need to center their propositions on voters, but they also need to be pragmatic. They need to be reasonable, and they need to tell people that they can win, and this is what they're going to do with that. So I think that'll be part
Is
of the conversations.
it,
Um, as for who that is, I have a few folks that I have in mind. I don't know that they're interested in the job, but I think it will be really important that the people who put their hands up are not just folks who are more to the left of the party, but folks who are in all parts of the party, so that we have a healthy discussion about what the future of the party looks like. And I may have to convince some people to run. There may be a few of us having to convince some people to run, but yeah, competitive would be helpful.
should we be anticipating a vigorous debate between the more kind of pragmatic wing of the party and the more radical left wing?
I think so. I think so in the same way that I think, Dale and I have talked about before about that happening in the Conservative Party. There's definitely some of that in our party too. And I think the folks who were maybe a little bit louder in the last few days are definitely more to the left of our party, saying, Jagmeet's not doing enough, or he's not talking about the things that people care about. What we saw in this election, what I was with Jagmeet the last 2 weeks of the campaign, and what I heard on the road is folks wanted to vote for us. They loved what Jagmeet was talking about. They loved what Jagmeet's plan was. They wanted to send more New Democrats to Ottawa to make sure we could get those things. They just didn't trust that Pierre Poilievre would be stopped, or they just didn't trust that we would be able to take on Trump. So I don't, we've heard a lot about the vote collapsing. I don't think it's the vote that's collapsed. I think people just lent their vote somewhere else. So I think the appetite of folks to have people who do reasonable things like dental care that help people in a real way is still going to be there. So yeah, there's going to be a debate, but um, I I don't know if there's any New Democrats on the call, but my wish or my hope or my advice is that we can't do a dramatic change. I think taking lessons is important for what comes next, but taking a hard turn to the left, I don't know is what folks need right now. I think folks need somebody who can help them today, tomorrow, in a few weeks, in a few months' time. And unless we're able to tell folks how we're going to do that, we're not going to move any further ahead in this
We
more and
will
more
watch.
two-way battle.
We will watch Bruce. I mean, obviously, this is a Carney government, and that the win is very, very much, and the sustained ascent is very much a function of him and his personality and what Canadians were looking for in the face of kind of future uncertainty. Who influences him? Who are the other people who are going to have a major say in the direction of the country and the Liberal Party and the Liberal government going forward right now? Who does he
Well,
listen to?
yeah, I mean, listen, there's a strong cadre of experienced advisors that surround the leader. And listen, he's the least performative politician I've ever seen in my 41 years of active involvement in politics. That's the first observation. He's very disciplined. He is on top of his brief, unlike anyone that I have ever seen in action. But like some of the people around him that will be influential in the days and weeks ahead, Janice Charette, one of the most distinguished former public servants in this country, who has been chief clerk of the Privy Council both to Stephen Harper and to Justin Trudeau. And boy, what a sense of reassurance a number of us got when we saw her on the bus and on the plane, because there's a person who has dedicated her life to this country and is deeply experienced. And you talk about adults in the room, like she is a boss.
She wants to leave, though, doesn't she?
She may, but listen, she will be involved in some form or another in the transition based on her experience. But there's others that are around the prime minister, including former cabinet ministers Scott Bryson and David
Right.
Lametti. Um, my friends Tim Krupa and Braden Cayley from British Columbia, who I of course remember them when they were young liberals, and in Tim's case as a former candidate, but people that are deeply experienced and really do understand both the country and the machinery. And of course, we'll see if Marco Mendicino continues on as chief of staff or if he steps back to the peace and tranquility of Toronto, or as Alan calls it, godless Toronto. And so there is a lot of experience around this prime minister. And I would say the thing to keep your eyes on in the weeks ahead is just the need and imperative of this government to really have ruthless prioritization on the things that matter the most. This will not be, in my estimation, a government that tries to do everything all at once, as other governments may at various points in times have tried to. This will be a government that really focuses on the critical issues at play, and the points of alignment for all the people on this call is really going to be around the Canada-US relationship and building economic resiliency in this country in the face of some profound challenges from the current administration.
Back on personnel, I mean, he is godfather to Krista Freeland's child. She's been kind of sidelined. I mean, a lot of us kind of feel bad for her, quite frankly, given the role she played with Trudeau, both in long term as a supporter and also as the trigger that made you have him go. What's her role going forward with Mark Carney?
Well, listen, she will play a role. I am certain. As we say about cabinet making, those who know don't talk, and those that talk don't know. So as I speak, everyone can presume that I don't know. But there is very few people in this country, let alone in the world, that have the sort of corporate memory that Chrystia Freeland has. And I suspect that her corporate memory and understanding of Canada-US file and the global dynamic at play with Europe and Ukraine will be put to good use in some form or another. And so, his challenge will be to balance out the new cabinet with stability and experience and continuity on some of the critical sort of Canada-US files, but at the same time, to Ellie's point, putting a new face on the government. And he has a deep and rich pool of freshly elected Liberal MPs, new MPs, that can come to the party in some form.
And I want to get into that when we talk about building a new cabinet. But first, I forgot to mention right off the top to those who have tuned in that there's a Q&A function. If you have a question that you want to put to either any one of the individual panelists or the panel as a whole, please do, and we will try to get to it over the course of the conversation. But as you do that, Ellie, I mean, you touched on this a little bit. I mean, Carney has said that he was going to wait until the election was over, and he was probably right not to try to engage Trump given how chaotic that can often be. But that's now when he's supposed to do this. What does the timeline look like to actually sit down and start that negotiation? And what's his going in position in these talks? Where does he start?
Boy,
Yeah.
short answer is I don't know. Have to get in his head. Can I start a different place? Bruce talked about the two priorities, which I agree are highest, but there is a big trap looming, which is that monster of a platform that they produced that is so overwhelming that they would take 4 mandates to implement most of it. I don't know whether that was just a political exercise that will disappear quickly, or since he has his own personal signature all over that document, whether he's going to get mired in mandate letters and setting out agendas for ministers and trying to implement the hundreds of proposals. That's a big trap waiting him.
And even to build the structures of a lot of these organizations that are supposed to provide the funding and the subsidies that they're talking about. It's huge.
Absolutely. And it's not clear that either his ministry or the departmental structure is sufficiently agile or deep enough to start implementing an agenda this broad and this deep. On the Trump thing, if track record is anything, he will proceed slowly, unless provoked by Trump, which is obviously something nobody controls, and Trump delights in. You know, Trump is in Detroit today to make the linkage to cars obvious on election day. But Carney will want to think through, although I'm sure he has done a lot of that, what the approach will be and what striking with power means in the current context. He'll only get one shot, maybe two, at developing an approach to Trump before that dynamic will change, because Trump will start applying pressure. I think it's in Carney's interest to, as best he can, hold his powder dry, get ready to deal with Trump, particularly in the G7 context, which is in early June, and not get into a jousting match. First,
I wanted to ask you about that because we saw his very first move was not to go to the United States to talk to Donald Trump, but to go to Europe to talk to the Prime Minister of Britain and France. He's got the G7 coming up. Could part of his strategy be to try to develop some kind of alliance, some kind of larger coalition to deal with the United States from a global perspective?
No doubt about it. That's where he's.
And I guess the further question of that, does this mean we're going to see a prime minister playing a much bigger role on the global stage than we've seen in the recent past?
Well, Trudeau played a large role on the international stage. It was just a different one. But I think Carney has entree to it in a way that most don't. Has
Right.
personal relationships that he can leverage. But he's got an alternate vision of a post-globalized, post-US dominated world. And we have to build a counterforce to deal with an uncontrollable and unpredictable US. He clearly believes that, He's animated by it. He's got the leverage to deal with other countries. The anger around the globe that has developed around Trump is building, not receding. So look, I think he's an ambitious man with lots of global experience, and I think he's going to want to take a global lead on some of this stuff. I just think that he's going to wait for the proper moment. He can't do it over the next few weeks.
Great. Gail, you've been looking there at the Q&As. Anything that you want to raise with the panel?
There've been a couple that have been kind of looking back on the campaign. One just came in. You rightly emphasized the primacy of the key economic related issues and how the new government proceeds. For those of us who want to keep broader issues on the agenda, do you have any thoughts or advice other than lead with the connection to the economy? Which Bruce and Ellie have both emphasized. Any advice, I guess. Bruce, do you want to maybe take that one? Advice for
Well, I think I
clients that
hit
we
it
have?
at a 20,000 foot level, which is, there are points of alignment that this government is clearly going to pursue, and there is opportunities, like just because there's going to be a focus on Canada, U.S. and the broader economy and alliances with partners in the EU and elsewhere in the world, that leaves lots of opportunity for people in the business community, not-for-profit sector, and elsewhere to align with, because there is economic resiliency and projects of national interest that will need to be built. There will be cultural projects that will need to be built. There will be all sorts of things that will add to the rich texture of Canada and will contribute to the strengthening of the country that need to be done, to paraphrase from the Prime Minister, faster and more efficiently than ever has been done before. And so I just think, as we're in this interregnum period where we're figuring out if it's a majority or minority, as we're waiting in the next couple of weeks for the writs to be returned and a new cabinet sworn in, and the House soon after to be called back, a read and analysis of the Liberal platform, but also where there are points of alignment between the Conservative and NDP platforms and what the Bloc has said and the Liberal platform. Those are good tells. What we saw in this campaign, which I haven't seen in my lifetime, was a real policy convergence during this campaign. And I may be an optimist, but I do believe that policy convergence, which in some cases was the Conservatives moving to the Liberals, and in other cases was the Liberals moving towards the Conservatives, could form the basis for people getting along in the short term in the minority parliament. And the key will be to get along long enough for us to see what happens in the U.S. midterms.
Well, let's go there and see and
Can
talk a
I,
little bit.
Alan, can I just add one thing there that we've ignored and shouldn't, which is that the federal provincial dimension to all this is going to be key. The need to rebuild a Team Canada around provincial consent and integrating business voices is, I think, going to be a high priority for him, and the right one. I don't think the Fed-Prov process was sufficiently orchestrated and aligned and coordinated up until now. I think he comes into office with a tremendous amount of goodwill at building a kind of collegial environment, and it's going to be a major thrust.
Let's get there in a second. But first, Melanie, I want to ask you. I mean, Ellie makes the point that short term, it really doesn't matter whether it's a minority or a majority, but longer term, it probably does. How open-minded would either the NDP are, given how the supply and confidence kind of worked out for them this time, and to also even to the BQ, to the overture of being a partner? What kind of a role are they going to try to, the minor parties going to try to play in Parliament going forward?
Right. I definitely think that both the NDP and the Bloc will be open to collaborating with the Liberals. I think I saw a tweet from Yves-François Blanchet this morning saying the Bloc stands ready to work with the Liberals. I think it's to their benefit. They saw in a real way in this election where the NDP was able to use against them that they've gotten absolutely nothing done for people. I think the line that Jagmeet used was as useless as the monarchy, which I think was played well in Quebec. So I think they heard that in places like Berthier-Masquinongé. Of course, they were able to keep it, but that will be a big one for them. And of course, they want more of their folks in Ottawa. So the opportunity to rebuild and keep the government steady for a while will be important. And I would say the same thing for New Democrats. Like I had to laugh this morning when I was doom scrolling a little bit,
You
seeing
weren't doing much laughing this morning, I
I
understand,
was
though.
not doing much laughing.
No.
I haven't done much laughing in the last few hours, no. But doom scrolling and seeing some conservatives say, oh, New Democrats are going to cross the floor and join the Liberals to give them a majority. And I got to laugh. Jenny Kwan, I don't remember which election, Bruce, this would have been provincially, but Jenny Kwan was one of the two MLAs left standing, and she stayed a New Democrat then, and she's going to stay a New Democrat now.
2001
2001, thank
provincial. Her and Joy McPhail,
you.
two
Thank you.
legends in this province.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a risk of any of those folks crossing the floor. But again, like and I want to go back a little bit to the vote didn't come out for us, but it wasn't we don't like you. We don't like what you're talking about. We don't think you should be here. It's this election's just too important. So I do think the ability to work with the Liberals to get dental care and pharmacare and anti-scab legislation and other things that NDP members are really proud of is something that will be a motivating factor for New Democrat MPs too, to work with the Liberals. And if there's something that they can go get out of that, I think that's great. And of course, they're going to go through a leadership race. So they're going to need a little bit of stability for a little bit too. So all those factors I think are important, both from a real perspective of how do we help people in this time, but also from a perspective of, maybe a little bit more strategic or political or partisan, I should say.
Dale, Bruce talks optimistically about cooperation. Ellie's talked about the importance of federal-provincial relations. I mean, Preston Manning has warned that if a fourth-term Liberal government will see the rise of Western separatism. Daniel Smith has said, if we get another Liberal government, here's my 6 demands that have to be dealt with. Further to that scenario, if the Liberals have to have a partner, and that partner becomes the BQ, what's going to happen to federal provincial relations, especially in Western Canada, with a fourth term Liberal government supported by a party who will support you only if you're doing what's in Quebec's interest only?
And that scenario I think, is probably the worst case scenario for Western Canada, particularly if for the Bloc it means blocking pipeline development through Canada, which, I mean, of course, for those of us who live in Western Canada, that's very, very bad news. I think I think Ellie mentioned Team Canada, and I spoke about this on the last webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago. For those of us who, and I'll just say it again, for those of us who live in Western Canada, this kind of Team Canada type of approach that's been talked about a lot is viewed very, very skeptically, because by default, we believe, or at least many of us have believed, that Team Canada means Quebec and Ontario. And by default, that excludes provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta. So if Mr. Carney and his new government, if they move forward with a true Team Canada type of approach, where they work with all provinces, including the Western Canadian provinces, and they say, we will approve pipelines. We will get out of the way of the provinces in terms of natural resource development. We will have a one-stop shop to approve major projects. If Mr. Carney and his government do that, I think that will go a very, very long way to improving relations between the provinces. And Mr. Carney, and I'll just say this, he was elected by and large, I think we would all agree, even those of us in the West, he was elected on a mandate to deal with Donald Trump and tariffs. He was not elected on a mandate to do much of what Justin Trudeau did in terms of carbon tax, social policy focus, not focusing on the economy, which I'm really glad that Elliot mentioned that. If the Carney government focuses on the economy and getting things done, that will go a very, very long way to Western Canadian provinces and premiers, particularly Danielle Smith and Scott Moe, to maybe not giving a full thumbs up, but at least we like this. We can maybe work with this guy.
Well, can I
Yeah.
point out,
Let me just
can I
ask,
point out,
somebody ask Dale a supplement to that, because I mean, is it schoolboyish to anticipate that above and beyond federal provincial relations, they may actually be able to reach some accommodation with the Conservatives if they advance an agenda like that? Dale?
Um, yeah, potentially, I think because so much of Poilievre's platform was focused on getting projects done, right? Getting pipelines built, just getting out of the way of the provinces and the industries to do the things that make a province like Saskatchewan go, which I've said many times to the media and on webinars recently. Saskatchewan is best when it is able to grow things and take things out of the ground and then sell it to the rest of the world. I mean, we are an export driven province. So I mean, it might not be 100% support from the Conservatives if the Liberals help us do that, but it would be nice if that
but
happened.
can I point
We
out,
interrupted you there.
Alan, can I point out the Carney
Sure.
has already met, or at least promised, all three of Dale's uh, policy fixes that he wants to put on the table. He has promised one-stop shop. He has promised expediting approvals. He has promised expediting pipelines. He's very sensitive to it because he believes in all of that.
You want,
The,
sorry,
the one thing
I look forward to it happening.
the one thing that I would just add, Alan, quickly, because you asked that question, provincial, federal, particularly at the BQ, and I didn't mention in my answer either of how this plays out in our parliament. But there's also the upcoming Quebec election, which is I think slated for early next year, which will also I think play into how all of this works, particularly with the Parti Québécois doing better in Quebec and wanting to take a go at François Legault's CAC. So that could also play into how this all works, if it is a minority government, of course.
So looking forward to cabinet. What kind of criteria Carney's going to be using it, and how important is it that he shows a new face on this and not revert to the people who had the positions they had under Justin Trudeau?
Obviously, an economic focus. It's been the focus of his campaign. It's been the focus of his days as prime minister thus far. And he has to strike a balance between experience and corporate memory and the new face. So he's got Carlos Lateo in Quebec, the former finance minister, Tim Hodgson in Toronto, former chair of Hydro One, who actually worked with the prime minister when he was at the Bank of Canada. You've got Buckley Boulanger in Saskatchewan. You have two new MPs in Alberta. In British Columbia, you've got the former mayor, Gregor Robertson, who is a deeply experienced politician, but also some interesting cats on Vancouver Island, both Will Greaves, a Canada-US expert, and Stephanie McLean, a former Alberta New Democrat cabinet minister who was elected in Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. So there is a bunch of new faces who have economic experience and expertise that can be brought to bear, that can be new faces in this government. But you can't just bring in a whole bunch of new people and say, congratulations, you're now in charge of the Canada-US file. Good luck with it. I expect some of the, tell me when you finished. So I do expect that there will be this blend of old and new, experienced. And that's not to say that the newly elected members of his caucus aren't experienced. It's just that this is an entirely different universe that they're going into. And I should say it's remarkable, given the short turnaround time, that he was able to get such a strong list of new candidates, both both elected and now on the verge of getting some sort of responsibility at the cabinet level.
We've only got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try to start winding it up here and asking each of in turn, what are your final thoughts? What's the single most important thing you're going to be looking for or monitoring over the next few months? Melanie, let's start with you.
No easy task. Maybe for me, it's just what Parliament looks like, what the cooperation looks like between the parties, and we've got, every party has said we want to support Mark Carney in the fight against Trump. So seeing whether or not that comes to be, and for me, particularly as an NDP member, what it means for the party if they're able to still wield some strength in Parliament, and what the leadership race looks like, and what that could mean for the future direction of the party is what I'm taking a close look at, I think, for the next few months.
And we have seen the country come together in the face of
Totally.
these threats in a way we really can, and addressing issues that looked like they were dead. Interprovincial trade barriers, east-west pipelines, and there seemed to be at least an open-mindedness there.
Totally.
So let's be hopeful. Dale, what are you looking for? What are you monitoring right now?
Probably no surprise. How does the prime minister and his government, how do they interact with the provinces, particularly with premiers like Daniel Smith and Scott Moe, and and what policies do they bring in that maybe brings the temperature down that's pretty high in Western Canada right now.
Bruce, what's on your radar?
How does this prime minister and his government strike the balance between having to act urgently on a wide range of files and also letting the play develop while looking forward to the US midterms, where you may end up with a Democratic Congress, both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, that would fundamentally change the power dynamic in Washington and possibly bring more reasonable behavior to the American administration. So you may get a better outcome if you let the play develop a little bit. But the economy is going to be hit, and hit hard. We've already started to see it. And so you will have to act immediately on a number of items. But that's what I'm watching, how they strike that balance and use that energy and those events to their advantage over the life of this government.
An important point. I mean, there's a poll on the weekend that had Donald Trump the lowest approval ratings at 100 days in office for 72 years. The notion that, what we've seen for the last 100 days is going to pursue for the next 3+ years is not necessarily the case. Ellie, last word to you. What are you looking for?
Two things. One is a tight focus on priorities. I fear an incoming government will be too ambitious and get bogged down by the wide breadth of stuff that's been put on the table through the platforms. And that one is of significant concern. The other one, which we haven't talked about, but we will have to talk about, is the balance he will have to strike between accepting damage and retaliating and causing pain to the United States, and building support packages, both for business and individuals. I think that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. The uncertainty is causing bankruptcies, is causing businesses to ratchet back. We haven't seen the pain yet that is going to be inflicted on the population. And he needs to, in order to maintain support for what he needs to do, he needs to be able to cushion the damage being done to individuals and small and medium business. And that's a balancing act that's going to be very difficult and cost a lot of money.
Good conversation. Ellie Alboim, Bruce Young, Dale Richardson, Melanie Richer. Thank you all for participating in this, and have a really good day. Those who watched, thank you as well. If we posted a question, we didn't get to it, we will get back to you directly. Otherwise, have a great day, and all the best.